Hey, Buddy Manning here. Welcome to a Thursday edition of the Garden Report as Celtics Pacers prepare to play game 2 of this East Final Series. And back, of course, to talk about it is Caitlin Cooper. Caitlin, we had to know it was going to happen. Celtics, Pacers, East Finals. We've been talking about these two teams, hypothetical trades, real trades, all these different connections over the last couple of years here. And here they are in the East Finals. Crazy win in the second round for Indiana to reach this point. Some injury help, certainly. Celtics got their injury help, too, and they're both here. And they both just played a fantastic game one. So I was bummed for a minute that we didn't get the Boston-New York thing, which is kind of what I was looking forward to. But once I sat back and said, all right, Pacers are healthier, play an exciting brand of basketball that we've talked about all year, and we actually saw it play out in game one, I was like, all right, I'm up for this. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, I mean, we got to do this during the in-season tournament. Now we get to do it when
that too, yeah,
with a little bit higher stakes here in the actual playoffs. So the Pacers are starting to hit a better mark. Obviously, the last, overtime, last 10 seconds of the game went a little bit haywire. But by comparison to game 6 and 7 against the Knicks and what they did through the middle portion of that game, we're starting to see, I think, which is most importantly, Pascal finally getting to play with who Tyrese Halliburton's capable of playing like. So that's kind of the biggest takeaway that I have from these last 3 games.
Yeah, well, let's start with him because he was great last game. He was awesome in that first game against the Celtics during the regular season too. I think 7 games into his time with the team. He's a guy that looks good moving in space with them. They're putting him at the free throw line, letting him shoot over that drop that the Celtics are playing there often. And, it was interesting. Celtics, they've talked a lot about how they're willing to give up those twos. They don't want to lose that 3-point volume battle. They won it in game 1, 45-35, hit 2 more threes than the Pacers did. But Indiana did hurt them from mid-range. Siakam, a big part of that. Nembhard had the 2 big ones late. And then in overtime, they finally got what they wanted. I think the Pacers missed 2 in overtime, at least according to the stats here. So what are your thoughts on how they're using Siakam, how the Celtics are guarding Indiana to start the series, and how that's going to play out?
Well, all the shots that you just mentioned all involved Al Horford, correct?
Right.
I mean, I think that was what I found was going to be most interesting about this series was the 5 spot and how both teams reacted to it and who all ends up playing the 5 for both teams. So to start the game, as you mentioned, the Celtics playing Al Horford and drop against Tyrese Halliburton. Typically, that's Tyrese's best coverage by the numbers. And of course, because of what he can do as a pull-up shooter and because his pull-up shooter shot has started to return with a vengeance here late in the playoffs by comparison to what was going on post-hamstring injury toward the back end of the season and through the first 2 rounds. So eventually, just before halftime, Al Horford played a possession against Pascal Siakam, and Jrue Holiday intentionally took a foul. And what was very telling to me is Al Horford was like, oh, for this final possession, I'm going to motion and I'm going to go guard Aaron Nesmith so that Jaylen Brown can come guard Pascal Siakam and we can switch that ball screen. Then after halftime, they played one more possession with Al Horford on Miles, and then that was it. And for the rest of the half, when he was in, he was predominantly guarding Pascal. And Pascal was the most frequent screener for the Pacers in that game. That was a definite development for the Pacers that typically when he's been facing these cross matches in the playoffs, whether that's against Brook Lopez, whether that's against Isaiah Hartenstein, normally it's with him attacking in a one-on-one isolation type situation, maybe a retreat dribble and a charge, those types of attacks. In this case, they were using him as the roll man a lot more often and having him roll into that free throw line area against Al Horford, predominantly there in the fourth quarter, until eventually Al Horford ended up doing a bunch of off-ball switching and was at times even guarding Andrew Nembhard. And then, as you mentioned, Nembhard ends up making 2 shots against Al Horford additionally in the mid-range area. So for me, looking at it from Boston's perspective, a lot of the questions are going to have to come from how exactly do they continue envision using him defensively? Does that mean that they need to go potentially to more switching, which during the regular season, the Celtics only had Al Horford switch onto Tyrese Halliburton one time, and it was the dagger in the in-season tournament that ended up being the 4-point play. Or I'm a little surprised that they didn't go back to what Al Horford did there just before halftime. And do you eventually just put Al Horford on Aaron Nesmith?
Yeah, because they're going after him. Cleveland did it. You knew the Pacers were going to. They don't make any they don't hide it. They say we're going at him, we're putting him in actions, we're testing him, and when he's playing 40 minutes, you want to make a guy like that work, and they did a good job of it. They did a lot of good things in this game. I thought the handoffs were so crisp. They really got guys going downhill, even in that in-between area off of those multiple layers of offense. It was great to watch. The pace was obviously there. Feel like they got the Celtics caught up in it a little bit, and the Celtics are comfortable playing fast. You saw it, especially at the beginning there. They were the ones actually getting the fast break points to begin the game. So I think that's where Indiana's going to look and say, that screwed us. As much as the ending screwed us, the beginning there, the 12-0 run,
Right.
giving up all those transition points in the first
And
quarter.
Boston actually did score more efficiently in transition than the Pacers did in this game. I think they scored over 140 points per 100 transition plays. So
yeah, and Joe talked about that. He's like, if they're going to play fast, that's opportunity for us too, to play fast and get points out of that. So it's a tough game to come away from for both teams, I feel like, because the Pacers inbound the ball there and shoot their free throws, they win, and it's a really bad loss, at least from a late game execution standpoint for Boston. Indiana, I feel like they did a million things well in this series, and like the adage goes, they have to win 5 games in the series now effectively, because they had that game and they squandered it. And the overtime wasn't great, certainly there. But what do you think is the biggest thing the Pacers are going to have to do better here to stay competitive and win a game against Boston?
I mean, certainly it comes down to I can't really explain some of the turnovers that happened. Tyrese dribbling it out of bounds twice, going to his left hand, other than the fact that I did point out before this series started that the Pacers had run way more of their action for Tyrese to be dribbling left off of picks because Derek White had been aggressively weakening him to his left. So typically the Pacers will look to adjust screening angles, or Tyrese just has to get around that. In the games that they've played against Boston, they've been like, we still want Tyrese to have access to the screen, so we'll just run it for him to get downhill to his left. For whatever reason, when Drew Holiday ended up guarding Tyrese at the end of that game, which was made possible because they had cross-matched Al Horford onto Siakam, and Drew's full court pressuring him, you could tell how heavily Drew was shading Tyrese to his left hand. I thought the Pacers probably could have been a little bit more active there, getting him a screen help, even though those were 2 just really bad turnovers from him. But in addition to that, I think they probably need to adjust how they're guarding Jason Tatum. I think a lot of Aaron Nesmith as a defender. I think Aaron probably pairs a little bit better guarding Jaylen Brown because of the differences in their games. However, in order to accomplish that, Pascal is going to have to guard Tatum, and I don't think that you really want Pascal doing that for an entire game. That being said, when they got into the overtime and Aaron Nesmith fouled out, I thought it was pretty highly questionable that they went ahead and tried to check Tatum with Andrew Nembhard, even though Pascal was on the floor. You had to have known that Tatum was going to go into the post in the way that he did when Andrew was attempting to front him. And then Tatum got to the other side of the rim and TJ, committed that foul, and it ended up being the and one. Additionally, very smart adjustment by Joe Mazzulla to be using Tatum as the screener as often as he was. Because throughout the playoffs, they're using Tyrese and hedge and recover. They don't want to give up those mismatches. So to get around that, Joe Mazzulla was like, we'll use Tatum as the screener. That's going to be more likely to get Tyrese on the switch. The Pacers responded to that, and they're like, we still don't want to give up the switch. So they were playing their guards in drop. Hence why Tatum ended up getting that 3-pointer in the overtime, because Andrew Nembhard was attempting to play that in drop. They had Ben Shepherd in drop against Tatum in the first half of that game. Those are tricky coverages for guards to be like, that's not something guards typically do. In the case of that, like Andrew Nembhard took a lot of flack for that play, and he probably could have been better containing the ball and then getting out. But Tyrese needed to peel back to Tatum. That's where the error went. If you were going to play it that way, once Andrew had contained Derek White on ball, Tyrese needed to peel back and be able to contest that shot. So it wasn't just a wide open 3. But I think some of the coverages against Tatum, they're really going to have to look at, because Tatum's been lights out against the Pacers in all 5 games that they played during the regular season. And obviously he was a big part of what they did in overtime, in addition to, Jaylen making the incredible shot.
Yeah, and Tatum pretty central to the big adjustment a lot of Celtics fans want to see right now. And we'll get to that in a second here. We want to give a shout out to Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/CLNS. Use the code CLNS for 100% deposit match up to $100. Go get the Game Time app tonight if you're trying to go to the game. Great deals over there on tickets last minute, and even after the buzzer too. Download it. Use the code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. And check out PXG. The weather's great right now. Great time to get out and golf. Or even if you're just out and about, it's great leisure wear too. Polos, hats, all kinds of gear for the golf course at pxg.com/Garden Report. Use that code Garden Report for a discount when you go over there. Tatum, a lot of talk right now, Caitlin, of whether he could move to the 5 in this series, because we talked about the Horford issues there defensively with him getting put in space and attacked. They tried Luke Cornett for 13 minutes. It didn't go great. Again, Turner's going to shoot over him. I thought it was weird they played him opposite of Turner just because of how big of a shooting threat Turner is. And, you didn't have Tillman in this game. Might not tonight either because of some personal stuff going on with him. Could try O'Shea Brissett. That's a popular answer too, if you are going to go small there. How do you think ultra small lineup would fare against the Pacers?
That's what I expected Boston to do going into this game. I mean, there was possessions during the regular season where Drew Holiday was playing at the 5 and Miles was guarding Drew as the 5
in that
setting screens
mini-series
for Tatum because Al Horford was out and that's who they ended up playing at the 5. So I think that's an option too. Obviously, Drew has reps playing the 5 and defending the 5 against Joel Embiid during the regular season as well. So with Tatum, I mean, Tatum already spent the majority of the second half guarding Miles as it was. Like they guarded Miles with wings, and Miles had, let me see here, 18 points in the first half, 7 to 10 shooting. As you said, a lot of that was against Luke Cornett, not only just shooting, but also rolling to the basket. And then Miles was 2 of 5 in the second half. The Pacers kind of went away from that because they didn't need to lean into Miles like posting up Tatum and Brown. They more so went to pick and roll between Tyrese and Siakam to still be getting it out Horford. So if I were Boston, I would be looking at the small lineups, or what they were predominantly doing when TJ McConnell was out on the floor is they were going to that 2-1-2 zone with Drew Holiday in the middle of it. They could potentially play more of that zone, I think. I think it messed with the Pacers a little bit. The Pacers went 3 of 9 when on possessions where Boston went zone, and then you could still play Luke Cornett if you wanted to because they weren't necessarily timing up those possessions with Cornett in the first half, but in the second half, Joe Mazzulla was a little bit more timely with it, and then you can play him at the bottom of the 2-1-2 with Drew still in the middle. So if you wanted to still play a deeper rotation, I think that makes it a little bit more feasible. So those are kind of the options that I would look at. I'd either play more zone if you want to play a deeper rotation. If you don't, I would have gone small, and I was expecting them to go small in game 1, to be quite honest.
Right, and they did some good things defensively, forcing the turnovers. A lot of them were unforced, so much of that goes on the Pacers there. But they did hold Indiana some droughts too, some key droughts too, especially in the second half, turning up the ball pressure. That great Holiday turnover he forced off Haliburton at midcourt. Jalen forced one along the sideline off Nesmith at one point. And then, of course, the decisive one off Siakam there that forced overtime on the inbounds there. So the pressure was good, even in the lineups they played there, but I think they can do it with some smaller lineups too if they want to switch more, if they want to cut off the threes. I think that's feasible. They probably just worry a little bit about the rebounding there, I would say. But what did you think of the offense on Boston's side? Of course, would Stephen A. call it disgusting or something like that? I think that was a little strong, but there definitely were some issues down the stretch there. Now, they were able to get Tatum going, as you mentioned. Love the 3-point play against the drop that you mentioned there. He got going for 36 points in this game, and the rim's certainly there, against Indiana. And you saw that one play where Cornett caught it at half court and just took 2 dribbles into a wide open dunk at one point there. So there were some highs and lows for the offense in this one. I think it was more the last 5 minutes.
There were some gross possessions, to be sure. I mean, the very last play when there was I think there was 15 seconds left to go, and Tatum got that rebound, and he took a one-legged fader over Miles Turner when the Celtics had 13 seconds left on the shot clock. Like, if you just looked at that as a static screenshot and you were like, I wonder which team won this game, you would never think that the Celtics won that game. And yet so many things had to go wrong for the Pacers and so many things had to go right for the Celtics. But I will counter that and say that, like, it seemed like every time the Pacers shut the water off on one option, Boston just has so many advantages. Like, even as I said, they ended up putting Pascal on Tatum for a time in the fourth quarter. And the Celtics were kind of like, okay, well, there's more length on you. We'll just let you chill for a little while. And it ends up being the Drew Holiday bully ball show for a while, where it's like, okay, now Drew's taking over. He's bullying Ben Shepherd to the basket. He bullied TJ McConnell to the basket. He bullied Tyrese Haliburton to the basket. And like, those matchups were available because they needed to shift Pascal to a different location. So it kind of felt like both teams, there's so much cross-matching and constant adjustments going on. Like, I mentioned this to my co-host, Samson Polk, and I told him, like, this series is going to be multiple games within every single game. Like, adjustments that the Pacers were seeing against the Bucks, they were very much like, okay, this might happen by game 3. In Boston, it had already happened by halftime. Like, it's already things that they're having to cycle through. So I think another thing that really stood out to me about Boston's offense, as I mentioned at the top, was how much they got in transition. I don't think I was necessarily expecting that. I thought it would be a little bit harder for the Pacers in transition just because Boston was the best transition defense during the regular season. But the Pacers throwing the three-quarter court trapping with Miles Turner out against Tatum certainly made it a little bit easier for Boston as well. Like, they did that a little bit last year against Luka Doncic, and it worked for them. I wrote an article about it. I'm like, okay, I kind of understand this. You're getting the ball out of Doncic's hands, Luka's hands very early. They were face guarding Kyrie. It was forcing Dwight Powell to be having to bring the ball up in space, and that's what I think they were trying to accomplish, especially when Luke Cornett was on the floor. Like, hey, if we three-quarter court trap Tatum, then that means a big's going to have to be bringing it, especially if we're doubling with Miles Turner. But in the end, like, their rotations on the back end of it were just so poor that really allowed Boston to get off to the quick start in the first half that they got to. So I kind of wondering to see how the Pacers, they've been the most aggressive team in the playoffs at full court pressure. I'm just questioning if they should continue doing the full court pressure with the personnel that were involved, because some of the possessions that involved Miles Turner and Obi Toppin doing that were pretty rough.
Yeah, and certainly we got a game tonight. Don't want to keep Caitlin for too long here, and there's a lot to talk about off game one, but we're going to get more tonight from what I think will be another close, high-paced, intense game. It really is a great style of basketball in this series. But I want to ask before we get out of here, what's this like? I mean, we were sitting here talking about Turner Sabonis trades a couple years ago. The Brogdon trade looked like it was going to be a full-scale rebuild at that point. It happened fast, and obviously the Halliburton trade accelerated things. You get some breaks in the first two rounds, but you take advantage of them too, and they were just fantastic this year, so it's not a huge surprise that they're in this spot. But it does feel like they're a little bit ahead of schedule too, and there's a lot of great pieces there. You make the Siakam trade, which I think is crucial to being in this position. Are you kind of amazed at what's gone on here? Were you expecting it, and just what's it like seeing them at this level?
It's kind of ironic when you think back to the episode that we did ahead of the in-season tournament game, because I remember telling you, because Porzingis wasn't going to play in that game, and I said, the goals for these two teams are different. It's important for the Pacers to play these in-season tournament games and get a measuring stick and play actual games with stakes, whereas for the Celtics, they're definitely playing the long game. They need to protect Porzingis and hope that he can be healthy for the playoffs. As we stand here in the Eastern Conference Finals, Porzingis obviously isn't going to be available for these first two games. And as it turns out, those in-season tournament games were very valuable for the Pacers because it revealed to them what holes they had and that they were in a place where they could go very hard after Pascal Siakam in the way that they did. And in that sense, it is just kind of cool to see a team being rewarded for going all in and wanting to make a trade in the way that they did and that they've been able to advance as far as they have.
Well, she is Caitlin Cooper. We're going to continue to talk to her throughout this series, hopefully several more times here. We got shoot-around going on behind us, so we're going to hear from some of the Celtics here shortly before this game, so stay tuned to that here on Celtics All Access. You can check out her work. Make sure you support her work because she does a fantastic job. One of the best basketball analysts out there. Patreon.com/basketball, she wrote. Great catching up with you here for a little bit, Caitlin. Enjoy the game tonight, and looking forward to talking about this series some more. It's going to be fun.
No problem. Thanks for having me.